we've had such a wonderful morning that I think the conversations are going to continue. So this is for the third session. And so I'm going to introduce our two session co-leaders. Svetlana Ushakova is lead researcher in Dimensions and Testimony at the USC Shoah Foundation's Institute for Visual History and Education. Dr. Ushakova received her doctorate in Russian history from Novosibirsk State University. Sebastian De Cesare is a senior editor and videographer for the USC Shoah Foundation, and he does post-production for volumetric video capture for Dimensions and Testimonies as well. So now he will introduce our presenters. Okay. And I have a request, since we have people all the way on the sides, on both sides, if all of us can work on projecting our voices and being a little bit louder, I think that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm introducing Zack Lischer-Katz. He's assistant professor of digital curations and preservation at the University of Arizona College of Information Science. Rashida Braggs is chair and professor of Africana Studies and faculty affiliated comparative literature at Williams College. And Bryan Carter is associate professor of Africana Studies and director of the Center of Digital Humanities at University of Arizona.
Thank you so much for this invitation to be at this symposium. We both have already gotten so many ideas and had some great conversations, so we look forward to thoughts after our presentation as well. I'm Rashida Braggs.
I'm Zack Lischer-Katz.
And our colleague Bryan Carter couldn't be with us because he's in the field doing the volumetric capture work as we speak in Cleveland, right?
I think that's where he's at.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. He's traveling like every week somewhere.
So he's with us in spirit. We're just gonna follow kind of the guidelines that were presented in terms of what you all wanted to know about our project in terms of our agenda. So what happens when you take someone like myself, a performance studies scholar and housed in Africana Studies at Williams College, who uses solo performance to revisit the experiences and the stories of Black jazz musicians from times past? What happens when you take someone like that and take her work? Okay.
Oh, there you go. Let me bigify it. Here.
Okay, well, a little sound and audio interruption, but it's okay. The basic idea is that I use embodied performance to revisit some of the experiences of Black jazz musicians. That's the background that I'm bringing to this project. Whereas Bryan is trained in virtual reality, augmented reality, and recreating some of these key moments in Black history. This is taken from his website. This is Harlem, and specifically 1930s Harlem Renaissance era. He's done a lot of projects where he uses virtual reality with his students to recreate these moments. So what happens when you take someone like myself who uses embodied performance and you take someone like Bryan Carter who uses virtual reality? We're both at the same page in terms of trying to enliven the archive, right? But there are some limitations with that. First off, what if you can't come and see me perform live in the space? So how do you kind of capture like live performance? And then with Bryan's work, the technology advances so much that this virtual reality project that he did a few years back looks so different than what we're able to do now with other types of technology. So how do you create an experience that feels live and it feels like present, while also using the best of technology and being able to store it for times to come? That's what really kind of prompted this project. All right. So our project is called Preserving BIPOC Expatriates Memories During Wartime and Beyond. It was funded by the National Endowment of the Humanities from 2022 to 2023. And it brought together myself, Bryan Carter's on the right edge. Hi, Bryan. And you see Zach. And then on the left is our colleague, Torsten, who is from VoluCap. VoluCap is a studio, a volumetric capture studio in Potsdam, Germany, not too far from Berlin, where they have gotten a studio on the old Babelsberg film production area, which is one of the oldest cinemas in Germany, in the world, actually. And they have created a volumetric capture studio. We worked together, all of us, and we created a kind of a proof of concept with the work that we're going to share with you today. We chose to use volumetric video capture because in my work, I had identified stories like Josephine Baker. Everyone's heard of Josephine Baker, maybe James Baldwin, right? My work was on the migration of jazz musicians, Black jazz musicians to France, and I read about them, I saw the video, the music, and all that kind of stuff, but I wanted my students to kind of feel it and be able to kind of talk to people up close to get their direct, kind of access to it. So we started with my background in the World War II period and decided that we wanted to capture some of those stories of World War II veterans who, at this point, there are very few left, right? So really immense stories that we could still capture in some way. And create a sense of like authentic presence and intimacy with those figures. And we started off with Mike Russell, who is the son of James D. Russell, who was a World War II veteran who served in Italy. And so we went to Potsdam, and this is a picture that you see of all of us outside of Mike's performance. I don't know if the video will work. Yeah. That's Mike. You will see later on what he looks like in volumetric video. We're all here at the end of it getting to see him perform live. And so he talked to us in the studio about his father, James D. Russell. And that's where our project really began. Zach came into the project because while we were able to use these technologies, what happens like years later, or like what happens when we want to get this to the classroom, to the museum? How do you store these huge files? Well, you'll hear a little bit more from Zach. And also, how do you keep up with technology as it changes so that this will still be relevant and useful to people from here on out? And so Zach was able to help us in terms of accessibility and distribution. What'd you say? And these are some of our research questions. Is volumetric video capture a helpful storytelling instrument for uncovering the often silenced or ignored personal narratives of lesser known BIPOC figures? Both Bryan and I had focused on people who are well known, like the Josephine Bakers, for example. But what about all of those performers and veterans and just people kind of getting through life? What about their stories that were really important to share? How does the nature of storytelling change when it is done using immersive, interactive, volumetric video capture? Does it resonate in distinctly different ways with audiences in comparison to other digital media? How do we eschew historical misrepresentation and misuse of African Americans' bodies and narratives? How can we effectively and uniquely preserve personal narratives, cultural memories, and other forms of oral history in immersive, multisensory ways that are also suitable for adding to the long-term historical record?
Thank you, Rashida. Now I'll talk a little bit about the technical processes that we've been working with here. Again, I was brought in for the archives and preservation side, but I also know a little bit about the technical process. So volumetric video, if you're not familiar with it, uses multi-camera setup. So you have cameras all around the subject and capturing video, but then stitching that together into these 3D volumetric models. So effectively, film and video are made of frames, right? Individual frames. In a sense, we have each frame is a 3D model in it. And so you can think about the amount of data and the new challenges it poses. Developed by the film industry and other areas. And there's a project that our partners at VoluCap were involved in, where they're recording stories of Holocaust survivors in Germany. We've found, and this is what inspired Bryan to start using volumetric capture, was that the prosumer systems are getting increasingly cheaper and also better. And so that we'll talk about in a minute about that. But he's using his technologies to expand his teaching at the Center for Digital Humanities at the University of Arizona. So we're exploring this for immersive storytelling, digital humanities projects, and cultural heritage preservation. That photo on the right is it's from the VoluCap website, and they're talking about their project of documenting these stories of Holocaust survivors in Germany. So for our project, we got some money from the National Endowment for the Humanities just to kind of explore what this would look like and how we can scale this for humanities scholars. And really thinking about these three different levels of capture: the professional level, which is the VoluCap setup, the professional Hollywood scale type of data rates and things like that, the prosumer level, which we have at the Center for Digital Humanities, and the consumer level, which I won't really talk about in this talk, but if you're curious about those, you can actually download this app called Volugrams on your phone there, and you can go to that website and check it out. The quality is not super amazing, but because it's using only one camera and then it's using AI to fill in the back of the subject, but it'll give you kind of a sense of what's potential. So VoluCap Studio is very exciting to go there on the Studio Babelsberg, where they filmed movies like Metropolis, and then more recently Wes Anderson's films. Grand Budapest Hotel was filmed there. And this stage has 42 cameras all around the subject, and you can see there's our friend Mike there in wardrobe. He brought out his favorite lucky shirt, right? And that was a big thing when we were playing this, is the wardrobe was important. Certain materials were better than others for doing the volumetric scans. The basic pipeline, if you look over in this at the 1500 gigabytes there, that's 1.5 terabytes. That's the raw data coming off all these cameras. And it goes through a set of pre-processing. They generate a 3D point cloud from that. And each step along the way, they're reducing the data rates, but still we're dealing with a lot of data here. Further along, we start to do mesh post-processing. Eventually, we get down to something we can import into our AR or VR application. Again, these are sort of the general industry guidelines from the Volumetric Video Guidelines report that came out in 2021, and they fit with what we found as well. Their basic workflow, it almost felt like a film shoot, right? So we had Mike going through wardrobe, getting some makeup. They had to calibrate all the cameras. He rehearsed the talk. I know, Rashida, you spent a lot of time with Mike kind of going through what he wanted, his stories, so that we could kind of get this done. We had only a certain amount of time for the takes. I think they said, 3 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, because the amount of data at 1.5 terabytes a minute, that's a lot of data, and then it all has to be processed. The capture phase was actually fairly straightforward. It really was like a film shoot, like, cameras rolling, action, Mike did his talk, and then we yelled cut. And then the post-capture, we preview the video clips at 2D low res, and then we can kind of select the clips we want to use for processing. I think it took about a month for them to process the output. They're using a lot of, they're starting to use AI for that to make it faster. And then they sent us some lower res, like some 4K and 2K files. So moving to Arizona, flying back from Berlin through, I think, DC. The Center for Digital Humanities, we have a setup there that uses 8 cameras, I believe, not quite 42. You can kind of see our workflow here. We are using 8 Intel RealSense D455 cameras, and it used to take about an hour with our old cameras, but now it takes 15 minutes to calibrate everything using these test targets. We're using this FormaVision platform, and we can talk about that maybe in the Q&A about using proprietary systems and the pros and cons of that. Similarly, we had a setup where you bring in your talent, your actors, your interviewees, set up the lighting. Sometimes we'll use a teleprompter, and it'll set up the sound and the mics for recording. And again, it's similar to a film shoot where we're recording to files. I should also point out we have a broadcast mode where actually Bryan uses this for his class. One of his lecture classes, he actually puts it into broadcast mode, so it's not storing the data, it's sending it directly out through this AR application he has. So his students can be at home and have their smartphones and see a volumetric image of Bryan lecturing to them in their dorm room. So it's kind of neat. So it has that dual function of recording and also broadcasting live. And then the capture phase, you start the capture, stop the capture, and then process it. And it goes, basically, in this setup, it goes up to the department's AWS server bucket there, and it gets processed overnight. And then if they want to put it into AR, they take the file path for that location after it's processed into 8th Wall. I don't know if anyone's used 8th Wall. And so that generates a QR code, and then you can give that QR code, put it up in your lecture, or send it out to your students, and they can scan that and have a little volumetric video of you presenting your lecture, or presenting your story, or what performance are you doing your performance. And so here's the video of Mike. This is included in your pre-conference materials, so hopefully you did your homework and watched all of it. But I'll just let it run for a second. Oops, so running a little fast for some reason. There we go. Normal speed. All right, does not like this. Oh, here we go. You'll see this in the demo that we'll have at the break and give you a little sense of what that looks like. And the files we got from VoluCap were very, very high resolution, and it made it harder to bring it into our consumer-based Meta Quest headset. So we're not necessarily at 100% resolution here, but it looks pretty good. And this is in the Center for Digital Humanities space there. Okay, challenges and opportunities and next steps. Going quickly here.
So I'll just read through some of them. Some of the challenges, limited time and limited recording position for elderly interlocutors. Mike, he wanted to sit down. He had a knee injury, and he really had to stand up in terms of all the cameras being able to get to him. We worked so diligently to get his narrative down to 3 minutes because, as Zach said, these are huge files, and that was their limit. And it went over to like 4.5, and they let us keep it, thankfully. But the type of work that took was a real challenge, like what is left out of this narrative that could have been in there. Lack of portability of volumetric recording equipment, and that's something that if we're funded, we would like to. We've already created a mobile rig with enough cameras and all the equipment to be able to take to the participant. The high cost, I think that's a challenge that we all have faced. The environment and the polish of the video. So when my students used the headset in the classroom and looked at Mike Russell's video, it was just a white background, and so it was kind of it kind of took them out of it. So working more on the environment and also the polish of the video, because it was reduced so much, it was a lot different than my experience at VoluCap Studio. Not a very interactable user interface because of the lack of a background and things that we can kind of add in future. The opportunities. An ethics of care kind of came out of it that I didn't expect. I had to spend a lot of time with him on the interview. That meant that I had to be accurate about the facts. He went back and checked and looked through his letters and notes and things like that. We also got to get his flag from his father, other items like his father's memoirs, and we got to digitally capture those as well. So we really got to be as authentic as possible, and he was a part of all the process, even in the costuming, being able to change outfits so that it was most useful for this. Putting volumetric video in relation to other media offers a rich student experience. I found that I put this video in the conversation with James D. Russell's memoirs, and also James D. Russell did an interview with the Smithsonian. So students were able to look at all of these texts and put them in conversation, and their experience was made richer for it, and as opposed to just looking at the video. And they were really curious to learn more because of this. They said, hey, I wish all learning was like this. It's so kind of exciting.
I know we're running low on time, but just a few of the other major challenges. We get, again, large file sizes, how to store those. These raw files are at 1.6 terabytes a minute. Do we keep those? How do we appraise and select for archiving? That might be really important if this is a testimonial. In choosing sustainable file formats, and maybe we can have a conversation about that in the Q&A. Also, I think one of my ideas, coming from libraries and archives, I'm interested in building a repository of these stories and think about how to organize those, what kind of metadata should we use, and think about how to make them discoverable and reusable. and then also maybe accessible with our other library collections. Not just have like, oh, these are the volumetric captures over here. How can we connect them to our library's other resources? And if we don't archive things properly, this is what the MP4 looks like without the sidecar file that puts it all together. So that's an important part of preservation and archiving, documenting those relationships between files, because you'll end up with something like this instead of something like that. And then another goal is building a network of volumetric video capture stations. Bryan is partnered with the Dunbar Pavilion in Tucson, Arizona, a historical African American Cultural Center, and they actually have a capture station there. They're starting to capture stories of community members in volumetric video. And so this is sort of an introduction from their curator over there. Yeah, so I'm gonna wrap it up there because I know we're low on time. Oh, wait, one last thing. We are resubmitting our NEH grant, I hope, for level 2 to help us refine our portable volumetric system and also start to record more stories. I think we'll stop there and leave plenty of time for Q&A from everyone. Thanks, everyone.
I was going through the white paper, and something took my attention about the white is different. It's more like complicated to get a licensing on from testimonials on volumetric video than in traditional tool capture.
Why so like consent and things like that? Yeah, no, I think that's coming up also with other contexts because AI is being used in the processing of these. There is a potential for the volumetric output to being used in many different ways, right? And so we haven't fully addressed this yet, but we do need to have clear consent forms that talk about all the potential uses for this volumetric video in the future. And that could, and people could misuse this content. So I think it's more challenging than I'd say 2D video because you are capturing a whole person's volumetric form, and it could be used for deep fakes, things like that. There's real challenges, and maybe there's technological solutions there too where we can protect those files. It's beyond my knowledge at this point, but it's a challenge, I think. And we're seeing that in the news too, like deep fakes and things like that. So we have to be aware of those things too as we're moving forward in cultural heritage areas.
Can I have people speak up a little bit, just because you guys are sort of facing each
Oh,
other?
sorry.
I have a hard time hearing
Okay.
a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you very much, first of all, for your presentation. When you talk about some challenges and like your experience, it reminds me, of course, of our experience of doing dimensions and testimony. And it's like particularly about care about interview. It's very important part of our production and pre-production as well. I have a question. Besides the cost of the project doing it with a professional studio, what are other benefits of doing it on a prosumer level with the universities, labs, etc.? What are the other benefits of doing it?
You want to take that?
Yeah, you can start. Yeah.
Oh, the benefits of the professional level?
No, like on opposite, like on doing it on the prosumer level.
Oh, the prosumer level.
Besides the cost.
Besides the cost.
Yeah.
I think, cost is huge. And then also, we're trying to move towards mobile, like rigs that you could bring anywhere. And so I think you mentioned before that for, subjects, participants who are older or maybe have different abilities, like getting them to Berlin is not that easy to do that professional level. So the prosumer makes it much more accessible. We're really trying to democratize the technology more and make it more accessible for more people.
And also not just get it to the prosumer level, but outside of academia per se as well, especially with some of the work that Bryan Carter is doing in terms of the community centers being able to have access to this so that they know how to use this technology, and it's not just professionals or academics in this field who are the gatekeepers for this type of technology.
Well, the question we talked a little bit before the symposium is I'm a little curious about the proprietary files and softwares, for example, for Formavision. It's a little concerning. How are you guys addressing that issue, especially for in the future for preservation and archiving?
Yes, I think it's a big challenge when you're using any proprietary formats or proprietary systems. So for Formavision, you upload all your material to to your server, and then they kind of process it, and it goes into some formats that we're not necessarily aware exactly how they're storing that. But we get derivatives from it in the forms of MP4s, which we do know what those are. Those are documented. And the proprietary part of it is there's this little text file called a BYTE, a byte file, that tells it how to wrap that. And I'm still looking into, and it's in the white paper, that I'm still trying to understand what this file does and whether or not we can get documentation on it, so that in the future, when Formavision is out of business, not that I'm wishing any ill will upon them, but we need to know what that file is doing. So I think more openness in these, or demanding more openness from tech companies and using standards that are open, I think is really the key. So if we advocate more, maybe they'll give us more documentation so that we can ensure the sustainability of these materials in the long run.
My next question is related to what we are doing, and it's a challenge for us as well. So that's why I'm asking you. So you were talking about how it's important for oral history, for preserving memories, but at the same time, you told us how much you rehearse basically the interviews that you record with the people you film. How do you ensure that the interviews agency is safe? How do you maintain interviews agency?
Wow, it's a really good question. I wished that we'd had more time for Mike to feel more natural in the way that he was sharing the story. Because of the limited time, the rehearsal, the kind of going over the text over and over again really made him just more kind of comfortable with the story. And so I think repetition and doing it in different spaces made him feel more just kind of natural as he was doing it. That's one thing. The other thing was, since we had enough time for him to make sure he was telling the story right, that he was remembering it right, that he was able to be accurate about it, that we weren't making part of this up. I really do think that he was honored to be sharing his father's memories, in a more thorough way than the memoirs could do, because he was able to get into some little details that the memoirs didn't have because of his relationship with his father. And it's kind of like the difference between writing an abstract and like a full proposal, right? That abstract can sometimes be even harder, but there's a clarity in it that maybe a full proposal wouldn't have. So I think in either case, he has agency, but the ways that we were able to really kind of create a stronger relationship between interviewer and interlocutor, that really made him feel natural and like he was able to share his father's story.
Yeah, I agree with you. The relationship between the team and the interviewee, it's often a key. Yeah.
And Mike's such a strong storyteller to begin with. Like, you spend any time with him, he's just telling you stories. He's amazing.
Yeah, the whole crew really enjoyed the experience of working with him. That's the other thing too.
Yeah, we spent the whole day with him, at least 2 days actually.
Okay, I have a question about you as a curator that due to these enormous files and the very difficult way to try to archive them, in this day and age, when under the XR umbrella, augmented reality, everything, I think many people are facing the same problem. Do you foresee any tools coming up, or is something that in order to solve that problem?
The fact that these are huge files, that tools to solve that. I think it's part of it's yes, there are tools because they are able to come out with files that are smaller that have the same, same information, better compression rates for these processes. They're using AI to optimize systems, which that's another question. That's another conversation we can have. But I think it's also a human question of like, what do we need for the future too? So I think there's some tech solutions, but also, do we need a 1.5 terabyte a minute file? What purposes might we need that for? For surveying, if this was a scientific situation where we're surveying the moon, then maybe we do want all that data. There might be diminishing returns on like if you scan me, at this high resolution versus compressing it down. So I think it's a question of like what's important for the application too, and also not to limit ourselves by the current situation. So for instance, the Library of Congress scanned a lot of their films at a resolution that was, VGA quality because it was the 90s, right? And they're like, oh, no one can see more than this. But here we are, 30 years later, and those little files, those videos look really small, these other films. So I think we also have to think like, maybe we do need to keep some of these very large, high-resolution files because in 5 years, we may be, building some sort of new system that we don't even know about. So I think we have to balance like needing space with being sure of what we're going to use these files for.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that talk. And so Rashida, my question is for you. Since you are like a performance artist and storyteller and have all this other, these other sort of performance aspects to your research, like when I was watching or just the sort of few shots of someone storytelling, I was thinking to myself, well, like what I really want to see is someone dancing or singing or performing theater in this, right? Where like they're not just standing and talking to you, but instead you're getting to see, Baryshnikov do a turn in front of you, or an orator doing a scene from a play, right? So I wonder, from your perspective, like what would be your like blue sky use of this kind of technology if you could just have all of that the way that you wanted to capture like performance of any sort?
Oh, thank you for the question, Elaine. Actually, I did perform in the space, and because these files are so huge, I still haven't seen what that looks like. But with like 42 cameras all around, it was an amazing experience, and I think it would be great to be able to look at. When we looked at some of VoluCap's other videos, we got to see someone skateboarding. And you could go right up and you could see their foot like kind of come off of, off of the board, or, a spin, or just like close up to their neck and the sinews of their muscles and all that kind of stuff, like they were right there. So the use of the space and movement in it is really quite like fascinating. I think that I'm kind of curious about what it looks like when we're able to take the mobile volumetric capture video with us, like to Paris, where my research is, and to put it in a space where there's an outdoor performance or something like that, and you capture that, and also we continue to work on recreating like environments and stuff that people can interact with. That I think will be really nice. Not only the movement, but also more details on the depth and the texture of the spaces.
I guess either one of you could answer this question. I'm just curious, what does VoluCap do with its 1.5 minute data crunch that it has to do? Does those files regularly get washed out and you guys get a chance to keep them at the end? They must be having the same problems you do. Do you know?
It's a very good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think our files are still with them somewhere in deep storage. I'm sure they pay for some data center to store them, like whatever the cheapest thing is. Because to put it like on their live servers and actually do the processing, I think it costs like $10,000 for like 4 minutes of processing, or to generate, not 4 minutes of processing. The output is 4 minutes of video. The processing time is like 3 weeks, I think, to do some of these, because they're doing, I don't know, was it like, I want to say 70K resolution because all these cameras. So I don't know. I have to check on that. But I think they put it in deep storage somewhere and then dust it off and bring it out when they need to process it. They do a lot of Hollywood stuff. So they did the special effects for Matrix. What's it called? Resurrections. Yeah. So the newest one, they did like that was a lot of their work. And so for that, I don't know what they do with the raw files. They probably give them to the studios and let them deal with it.
So presumably there's an archive building of all of these people who've gone through there. And one day that might be somewhere.
I mean, they probably have policies. They probably like, here's the data, they give it to the client, and they probably wipe their servers because they have to kind of go to the next project.
But since we have a continued relationship with them because we want to continue working with them, they would like to, like create like a manual and the software for individuals or individual like groups to be able to create their own volumetric studio like package. So they want to work with us to be able to kind of do that.
Right, yeah. This is something that came up last summer when we were meeting with them, and they were like wanting to license their software to educational institutions. The only caveat is that the more data they process through their system, the more their system gets better. So it's actually good for them to get a more varied array of input data. So their algorithms get better at producing it. They can do faster renders and make it cheaper. So that's, obviously anything like that, you want to check the licensing agreements that you sign. But they are interested in partnering with educational institutions.
I wanted to pose to a question that you actually said was one of your questions at the beginning that you were reading, Rashida, which is that does storytelling change if you have an immersive environment? And I'm wondering if you've made any discoveries in that process, the capture of storytelling looks different, or the way that we tell stories is different. I think we often think, how can we, actually digitize things that sort of exist, but that question that you're asking, how does the digitization actually change the very thing?
Yeah, I underlined your question earlier. What is the new meaning created because of the content? So this is a similar question.
That's clearly my interest.
I've been thinking about that because there was something peculiar that came out of this for me in terms of my perspective on the data and also my methodology. That ethics of care kind of came out of it. I mean, as an ethnographer, I always try to have an authentic relationship and be transparent about why I'm doing something or what directions I'm going in, and to get consent and all those types of things. But the level of detail that was required for the volumetric video process really made me like be in conversation with Mike all of the time in a way that I believe the story that we came up with was much tighter and more accurate and perhaps even more engaging because we were trying to distill it all in that. So that changed the story in comparison to if I were able to write about it or if I were able to sit down and do an audio recording or a video interview with Mike. But the thing that I also didn't expect was just and I still haven't really written about this, so it's a story to be told, right? But the connections between Mike, when I first met him, maybe 2009 or 2010, doing my research, and today, and he's still wearing that yellow shirt. It's his lucky yellow shirt, as Zack said, when he performs. And he's a part of the band called Black Heritage, which is a group of, it could be anywhere from 6 to 20 musicians from the African diaspora, a lot of Americans, but from other parts of the African diaspora who play everything from soul and funk and jazz to reggae, right? And so he's been a part of that band, and he helped co-found it about 30 years ago. And for that whole 30 years, he's had a lucky shirt, right? And so I was like, I bet he wore this like in 2009 when I first met him. And when my students had the goggles on and they were looking at him up close, tell that story, I just thought, wow, what are the possibilities of like sustaining that type of like observation or that type of connection, like 30 years down the road, like maybe they have the possibility of connecting like with him in the same type of way because we've recreated that type of presence that he has. And in terms of storytelling, I never would have thought that that type of connection to material, I never really thought about like material. But when I looked at James D. Russell, his father's video from the Smithsonian, I saw that he had on a cap that said, like, I think it said Black Heritage or something. I was like, oh my gosh. You know, so I was not only thinking about the shirt that Mike was wearing and my relationship to him and how that it played a role in it, and my students got to see it as well. I was thinking about the relationship between father and son and now me, and looking at these different materials and how the literal materials were carrying those stories. And I was able to kind of get a little sense of that through these like symbols. So that's really very intriguing to me.
Rashida, this is kind of building up Amy's question, but you mentioned that you had your students read the memoir and then listen to the Smithsonian oral history and then listen to this in this kind of VR format. How did they say what each one like brought to the table? Like how did the kind of immersive technology what did it add for them that the other ones didn't, or how did they play off each other? I'm just curious about their reaction to all these different forms were.
Thank you, thanks for the question. So the VR experience, they felt it was very physical and visceral for them. You know, they felt like they could almost kind of touch him. They felt more kind of intimately connected, like it was very down to earth and conversational in a way that's different than reading the memoir was. Even though the memoir was, about a life story, it wasn't an academic text, it was still, it was much more detailed than the volumetric video was able to be. So they appreciated the detail of the memoir, and I think that they were prompted to maybe explore more of the history from the memoir. And then the video, I don't know how much the students really engaged with the video. I think that the video from the Smithsonian, the aging of video technology, they're so used to seeing all sorts of video now that, maybe that was the most kind of boring, I guess, of the different texts. But I will say that the video was very interesting to me because of these connections, these like memories, these resonances between Mike's father, James, and Mike that I saw like with the cap, but also how the video captured things like he stopped for a second and he like picked up the phone because like somebody was calling him. He was like, and he didn't like, they didn't stop the recording and they didn't cut it. It was just like, they had the whole video. And then he was like, let me find this thing so I can show you where the medal is. And he's just like going through it, like looking for his medals, from the war. And you get to see all of that stuff that is usually cut out. And that definitely had to be cut out, like when we did the volumetric, video because of the time limitations.
Yeah.
So there are ways that the video had all of this visual information that I didn't expect, and that was juicy, right? And then the memoir had a lot of historical context and a larger community of people that James D. Russell was able to talk about, and a connection with history that the students were intrigued by. And then volumetric video allowed them to feel like, oh, it's like having a conversation with my granddad or something, This is really like intimate. He seems like he's a great storyteller. I really liked his hands. Some students were paying attention to what his hands were doing as he was telling the story.
Oh, are we at time?
We have buffers. Go ahead.
Trying to think about which question. I guess, okay, going back to preservation, I'd be curious to know from the Shoah folks, you probably are coming up against the same, I mean, it might not be 1.5 terabytes per minute, might be more, I don't know. What is your policy in terms of keeping the raw data? Because Zach is right, I can see both sides of this, right? Like we might not need that, but then 5 years, we might want to plunk him into the middle of an environment that is way higher fidelity, and now he looks out of place. Like, there could be reasons for keeping that. So like, what do we do?
Well,
What's Shoah doing with that project?
Well, to be completely honest, the project started with 20 cameras.
No, it started with 100
With
cameras.
100 cameras, yeah, that's true.
Scale.
Then they narrowed it down for that reason to 20, then to 9, and then basically 1 or 2.
One camera.
So yeah, not 1 camera. So basically, yeah, that was the solution. It was
And-
always a problem with the size.
But actually, like Shoah Foundation has a different policy because we are archive and we cannot delete anything. It's our mission to preserve memories, so we keep everything. We preserve everything. Like the earliest interviews that we filmed with 100 cameras, they are still like the all raw materials is safe.
Yeah, the raw material is always the same.
And it's a problem. It's a
I just
problem.
scaled down for that.
But it's just like our obligation before the survivors. We cannot.
Yeah.
uh,
Well, it shows you the difference between archives, right? Film production studios, maybe in the middle of libraries who deal with complete works most of the time, but sometimes special collections come in, things like that. And you want all those materials, but I don't know. It's something like, yeah, I mean, archive, you have certain collecting mandates.
Yeah. It's the policy. We keep everything.
So all that stuff's at the repository?
Yeah.
I have another question if you want. I mean, I was reading that you guys switched from DevKit to Forma Vision,
Right.
and I would like to know if it's a matter of better quality or better workflow, or what was the reason and what was the advantage?
Yeah, I've talked to Bryan and his students about that. So the original workflow at the Center for Digital Humanities was using this system called DepthKit, which used different software and different workflow. And for that, they found that they had to do many more steps before they processed the files. They would create these masks to block out the background. And so that was another step in the process. And so I actually had to fix the slide because I had the old workflow in here, and it had like many more steps. So it simplified it. Bryan has a lot of students who work with him, and so I think kind of getting rid of some of those steps and helped a lot of kind of like throughput. Like these projects wouldn't take 2 weeks; they might take half a week to kind of output. I can't say as much about the quality, but I think the quality has gotten better as well. But if you want to know the real secrets, you have to talk to Bryan about that. But it's a simpler workflow.
Okay.